India's backyard, so to speak, its sphere of influence, India's immediate neighborhood has just got trickier. Marxist politician Anura Kumara Dissanayake has won the general elections in Sri Lanka. In the past, Dissanayake has slammed, quote, Indian expansionism, unquote, and called India, quote, the enemy of Sri Lankan interests, unquote. Prime Minister Modi was one of the first leaders to congratulate AKD, as he is known popularly, but New Delhi remains cautious about the incumbent's pro-China tilt. India is now sandwiched between regimes that have little love lost for it. To the west and east are administrations with pronounced Islamist supremacist components in Pakistan and Bangladesh. In fact, just today we've heard that Pakistan has invited Zakir Naik, viewers, Indian fugitive. In the north is Nepal, and New Delhi is proceeding with caution after an unexpected alliance between pro-China Marxist Party, the CPN-UML, and the Nepali Congress there. Myanmar is imploding into anarchy where Chinese have made inroads and the Americans are trying to manipulate events. Now viewers, all of this many people think poses a channel. Am I therefore right to conclude that these factors make things tricky for India and its sphere of influence, or am I guilty of over-exaggeration? Let's put these questions out to two individuals who know a lot about Sri Lanka at one level, and of course the larger Indosphere, so to speak, at another. Padma Rao, senior journalist who has been covering the elections in Lanka, also joins us, and Professor Brahma Chileni, strategic expert. Now, Padma Rao, how do we see AKD, as he's called popularly? Is he going to sort of be a bit of a problem to deal with where India is concerned, or is he going to be pragmatic and perhaps let his ideological baggage sort of sit aside?
Good evening, Rahul. Thank you for having me. Actually, I think he's already set his ideological baggage aside, and that process began about 9 years ago when he formed a coalition of activists, intellectuals, women's rights activists, etc. So that gave him a kind of cloak of respectability, and it is that coalition that actually won the election, the National People's Power. So he has enough of cushioning to overcome the reputation that his own party, the JVP, which is undoubtedly the largest in that grouping, has. It indeed has, as you described it, a history of riots and violent protests, and thousands of people were killed in the 70s and the 80s. And it also notably protested against the India-Sri Lanka Peace Accord and the 13th Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, which envisages greater autonomy to the north and east for the Tamil population. But I don't see him as an immediate. I think that Sri Lanka is caught between a rock and a hard place right now, and more so somebody who is come to power with populist promises, because it is in a terrible economic crisis, and that crisis is far from resolved. So whatever may actually be the JVP's philosophy, I think Dissanayake is certainly going to play that down, and he has to tread a very pragmatic tightrope as far as the international community, but also as far as the immediate region, specifically India, is concerned. And one of the things I'd like to say is that he was invited to Delhi in March this year, February this year, and he has been, that immediately gave Sri Lankans a suspicion that this is the yes man that India is looking for. So there's always that, feeling that India has a hand in everybody who comes to power here. That this has been going on for a very long time. Almost every election has sort of the dark, looming shadow of India in the background. But as I said, it's really the international and the regional situation that will make sure that whatever else his philosophy may be, it will be kept in check for now.
Right. Let me bring in Mr. Chileni. How do you see the situation in the subcontinent evolve?
Well, at first, it shows that India is located in a very troubled neighborhood, a combustible neighborhood facing threats or challenges from virtually every direction. India confronts what I have long called the tyranny of geography. And this combustible neighborhood with its spillover effects is a perennial challenge to India's internal and external security. So the vote in Sri Lanka clearly is an anti-establishment vote. That's how AKD has been elected. But the challenge that AKD will face will largely be with the IMF and the international community, not so much with India. India was quite generous in keeping Sri Lankan economy afloat when Sri Lanka had this economic meltdown. India provided something like $4 billion in assistance. Compare that with IMF's $2.9 billion loan to Sri Lanka, just come with stiff conditions. The Indian credit was made available to Sri Lanka with no conditions. So AKD, despite his ideological background, his Marxist-Leninist background, and ideologically he might be pro-China, just the way KP Oli in Nepal, the Marxist-Leninist prime minister, is pro-China. Yet the fact for his government, for AKD's government, would be that Sri Lanka can ill afford to alienate India. The previous governments in Sri Lanka followed this policy of equidistance between India and China, as if Sri Lanka is located equidistance between China and India. India is right next door, and yet the previous two governments in Sri Lanka pursued this policy of equidistance between China and India, and AKD might follow the same path. It may not be an openly anti-India foreign policy, but certainly not what India expected. If Premadasa had been elected president of Sri Lanka, India could have expected a much friendlier government in Colombo, but India has to deal with whichever government takes office. And in Sri Lanka, AKD will face major internal and external challenges.
And does that also hold true, Mr. Chileni, for Bangladesh? Of course, Pakistan, I don't need to even touch upon, but Bangladesh, Myanmar?
The problem with Bangladesh and Myanmar is the role of external powers. There wasn't any external intervention in Sri Lanka. The government change happened democratically. In Bangladesh, clearly, there were elements, forces that played a role from beyond Bangladesh's borders. And in Myanmar, external forces are fueling the internal war. The US under Biden has been providing quote unquote non-lethal aid to the rebels in Myanmar. Non-lethal aid, according to Washington's own definition, includes lethal weaponry. For example, the flow of lethal weapons into Manipur, including drones, underscores how the Myanmar situation is impacting India's internal security. And in the case of Bangladesh, Biden is going to meet with Bangladesh's figurehead leader, Mohammed Yunus, tomorrow.
If he remembers him, that is.
Sorry?
If he remembers, that is.
Yeah, if he remembers that. In fact, if he remembers the appointment and remembers Yunus's name, but the meeting has been scheduled, which is the reason why Yunus has left for New York a day earlier than he was previously scheduled to leave.
Let me bring in Ms. Padma Rao once more. The Indian government is wary of Lanka giving safe harbor to Chinese alleged spy ships. Let's just call them that loosely. Will AKD be open to India's concerns? There are also, of course, issues with regards to the Adani investment there and follow through with human rights abuses on the Tamil minorities, etc. How do you see that playing out?
So these are three separate issues. One is the Chinese naval incursions, frequent forays into the Indian Ocean. The other is the Tamil question. And the third is the Adani wind power project. I'll start with the last one. The Adani wind power project there's a public interest litigation against it for other reasons. So that is one of the subjects that AKD picked up in his recent election rhetoric and said that he's going to remove that project because there's an element of corruption in it. So when I followed that up, I followed it up with the same question also also to the president, the outgoing, or rather the last president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, on a couple of days before the election. And he also said actually that there is indeed a question mark hanging over that particular project. So we are looking at it and all elements will be considered, but we're not throwing out projects per se because they're Indian projects. So that was Mr. Wickremesinghe. So this Adani project, AKD is, he just brought it up in his election rhetoric, but there is a public interest litigation. It is in courts. And that is the reason why any party, whoever, if Sajith Premadasa had come to power, he would have said the same thing. The second question on the Tamil question. Now, I've been, speaking to a lot of the Tamils are very miffed with the establishment, all of the Sinhala establishment in Colombo, because they say that none of them, they've been promising for years and years and years that they are going to, 13th, they implement the 13th Amendment or implement beyond that, and they're making them all kinds of promises just in exchange of votes and support for their candidatures. So this time there was a split in the Tamil National Alliance, which is practically the only parliamentary representation of the Tamils in Colombo. And the TNA is on the verge of, a major fracture. Part of it supported Mr. Sajith Premadasa, and the others floated their own independent Tamil candidate for the first time in the history of Sri Lanka. There was an independent Tamil candidate who contested the elections and did pretty well, actually, given that, he was the first, this was the first time. So now,
I'm really running out of time, so 30 seconds.
Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
That faction which supported him says that we are actually we want a what's it called, a referendum in the north and east, right? And what was your third question? The Chinese forays into the Indian Ocean. Now look, any of these gentlemen, there were 38 candidates. No matter who came to power, they would have to play a balancing act between China and India. But what is happening is that there is a larger awareness of the growing presence and of Indo-Pacific alliances. So for the moment now, it seems that things are under control, but everybody in each and every one of them will have to manage it.
Well, the next few days, viewers, will be crucial, of course, as he takes charge, and let's see how that plays out. Thank you very much for joining in, and coming up next is Anand Narasimhan with The Right Stand.